Okay, welcome LA301 students. What I decided to do is, in lieu of class this week, is to kind of do two things. And primarily in this lecture, I'm going to cover Chapter 2, kind of just highlight and touch on Chapter 3. Chapter 2 has to deal with the art of summarizing what others are saying. And chapter 3 has to deal with the art of quoting. So I decided I'll just very briefly touch on chapter 3 here this week, and we'll spend a lot of time on chapter 3 in class on Monday next week. I did put a discussion post in Blackboard for you to respond to, and I'll send this video out as an email and post it in Blackboard as well. So chapter 2, essentially, it's trying to get at teaching students how to write an extended version of what they say. And one of the things I like about this is that the authors point out, if we remember the example we gave last week when we talked about writing as entering in the conversation, and I gave the example of joining in at a party. Well, this chapter is all about, so if I walk into the party, your job now is to kind of fill me in. Fill me in on what has been going on in the conversation. Now, you're obviously not going to be able to give me word for word of everything that took place in the hour that I missed, but you're going to be able to give me a summary of what I missed. Okay? So if you can kind of go into this thinking of that mindset, that it's your job to summarize to your readers what it is that is being said about that particular topic. Okay, so that's essentially what chapter 2 is all about. Not summarizing enough is not good. Summarizing too much is not good. So you kind of have to find this balancing act with the summarization. So what I'm going to do here is kind of just go through these slides and talk about some of the main points for about the next 15 minutes. Okay? All right, so here it is. So in chapter 1, they kind of discussed, the significance of stating the they say before introducing the I say. Remember, it's not a good idea to just start your argument and make your argument. You should really introduce what others are saying first. This is where chapter 2 comes in. How do you summarize? Okay, so to do that, the editors of this text suggest it's summarizing the they say argument as soon as possible in your writing. So in that introduction, at least bringing in the basis of what it is that they are saying. Okay, in order to do that, you're summarizing what they're saying. You're not going to give it word for word. This is not quoting. This is not block quoting. It's a summary of what others are saying. So this chapter elaborates on this point, and in order to be in dialogue with what others are saying, you must be able to effectively summarize what those others are saying. Okay? And if you can't summarize them well, as noted here, you run the risk of misinterpreting their ideas or not explaining enough of their ideas to preface your own. Even worse, you could talk too much about their ideas and not your own. This goes back to that point that I made a minute ago, that not summarizing enough is not good, and summarizing too much is not good either. Okay, so here's I like this. There's an idea that whenever you go into reading others' work, it's a good idea to kind of suspend your beliefs about it, your disbeliefs about it. And just read it as kind of like you're in the mindset of the author, okay? And this is really cool here. So here, imagine you told a story, a very important story to your best friend, and here's your version of it, okay? Yesterday, something really horrible happened to me. Well, lots of things, actually. First, as you know, it was Valentine's Day. I was really excited to see my boyfriend, but he wouldn't answer my calls. It turns out he wanted to break up. Yeah, he dumped me last night. Then when I got home from school, I got a call from my boss telling me that I had to give up my shifts because they couldn't afford to pay me this weekend. Okay, this is this person's version telling the friend. Now, Let's take a look at this. Imagine your best friend is telling your story to another good friend, and she recalls it somewhat like this. This is real life. We can see this stuff all the time. Social media has the ability to skew original points of view, original stories, as it trickles down through the chain of our connections on social media. So here we go. So this is the friends version. So I talked to, let's say, Jane today. I guess she had a really bad day. Yesterday was V-Day, you know. Well, I guess she and her boyfriend got into this massive fight and he stopped answering her calls. Then this morning she called him, I think from work, and he said he didn't want to be with her anymore. Then I guess she got fired too. So no, maybe she wasn't at work this morning, but she got fired. They don't need her anymore. Okay. Now, notice the difference there. Okay. And if it was you in this position, if you were the person that originally told the story, would you be upset? Would you be annoyed if you heard that retelling of your story? And the reason is because not only is it inaccurate, it falsely represents you. Worst of all, you can't even defend yourself, right? Okay. So this example sheds light on how important it is to accurately summarize another person's argument. You wouldn't want to misrepresent or misquote someone and have him or her find out, would you? They'd probably be equally as mad as you are at your friend for the mistelling of your bad day. Okay? So the point is, we have to be accurate. We have to make sure that what we are summarizing about others' work is accurate. Okay? Now, I understand this leads to some issues, some problems, some frustrations at times, because, well, there are many factors, but one of the main reasons that I've come across in my time at teaching and writing is that maybe sometimes we don't believe that we can accurately portray or understand the author's work, what it is that they are saying. Okay, that is a key point that we need to keep in mind. Okay, so those who refuse to summarize, here are some reasons. Why is it that some writers don't summarize another author's argument, the they say, or the context for which they are writing? So this is really getting at the why a lot of people avoid this. They don't summarize what others are saying. Here's the answer. Many writers shy away from summarizing for several reasons. They don't want to go back to the reading and figure out what it says. Essentially, they're being lazy, right? We've done that. I've done that. They fear they will spend too much time devoted to the arguments of others and not their own. So lacking confidence, right? If you, this is especially important. I mean, if you're a procrastinator and you wait until the last minute to write papers, you're going to fall into this trap of not being able to spend enough time devoted to looking at what the others are saying. Okay, so this is why whenever you're assigned a paper, it's encouraged by your faculty to start the process early. Begin your research, because your research is finding out what others are saying. Okay. Lastly, they think that by responding to an assigned article, they are already on topic and therefore don't need to summarize. Okay. All right. So here we are, moving on. Our biggest summarizing mistake. What are common mistakes made by writers when it comes to summarizing another's argument? This part is going to answer. So here it is. Writers don't write enough of what others are saying, and writers write too much of what others are saying. So again, this is emphasizing that point I made when I introduced this lecture on the issue of not summarizing enough or summarizing too much. So we really need to find that delicate balance, okay, like the yin and yang. So what is this delicate balance or main aspect of a summary that the writer should be trying to achieve? The answer is a good summary requires balancing what the original author is saying with the writer's own focus. So you need to keep in mind your focus of your paper. And you need to also keep in mind that what you want to summarize from the other source, from the author, is related to somehow what you are trying to get at in your paper. Okay. So striking this balance can be tricky since it means facing both ways at once. Okay. So you have to face toward the author and also toward yourself. So you have to, while you're looking at the author's work, keep in mind at the same time what points that you are arguing in your paper. Okay. And those summaries of the other authors should relate somehow to your points that you're making in your paper. Okay. This is kind of one of those techniques for striking that balance. All right, I was going to sing, Journey's Don't Stop Believing, but I've got a little bit of a sore throat today, so I'm not going to put you through that torture. Anyway, so Don't Stop Believing. In the book here, it's presented to us this Peter Elbow's believing game. Okay, so what is that? Well, here's the answer. So in order to play this believing game, okay, writers must momentarily suspend their own beliefs or opinions or ideas and assume the beliefs, opinions, ideas of those in the conversation. So this is kind of just dropping your beliefs, opinions, and ideas and listening or reading what others are saying and taking it from the perspective of someone else, and that's the second bullet point. So otherwise, writers run the risk of sounding biased. The writer's own opinions will leak into theirs. So this is what we want to avoid. We don't want to come across as sounding biased. We don't want to come across as not summarizing what others are saying, because that may put others in a position of questioning and asking, why are they not addressing these other issues? We know this is an issue. Why are they going at this one-sided? Okay, so making sure that you're summarizing, but in order to do that and really get a good understanding, one of the clear ways to do it, according to Peter Elbow and the authors of this textbook, is to drop your beliefs, opinions, and ideas momentarily so you can truly understand, put yourself in the shoes of the person that is trying to get the information across to you. Okay. This doesn't apply just to writing. It applies to everyday conversations or debates or arguments with others, using, in face-to-face, the spoken word or the written word, both. Okay. All right. So this is a really important part here. So this fifth point touches on, and I'll see where this is in the textbook here. There's a nice little cartoon on page 36, and it reads, and then he says, then he also points out, and then another thing he says is, and then this is, I have found myself trying to get over this as we're trying to state what others are saying. The point is, we don't want to make these kind of list summaries where we're saying, well, he said this, and then he said this, and then he went on to say this, and then after that he said this, and then finally he concluded with this. Well, that's kind of like this list summary, which isn't a good idea when you're at this level of academic writing. So how do we get around that? Well, there are a couple different ways that we can do it. One of the things first is, let's go back here. So a list summary is summarizing without any regard to one's own interest. Okay. So when a writer makes a list summary, he or she simply makes inventory of the original author's various points, but fails to focus these points around any larger overall claim. So you're not tying it to anything else. You're simply listing out some points that the author is trying to make. Okay. Remember, we have to put these in context with our own views, our own opinion, our own points in our paper. Okay. So in a sense, these lists read much like I said. He states, then the author states, and so forth, very much like a list. Okay, so on page 39, we're presented with what is called some of these action verbs or signal verbs for making, introducing summaries and what it is that they are saying. This is a really important part, and I think probably the most important part that we're going to get out of this chapter is that when somebody is making an argument, if they're making, like Charles Murray is making an argument about his point, he's not simply saying, you know, so these kind of signal verbs for expressing an argument, if you look at the bottom of page 39, um, you know, extols, endorse, these are agreement. There's making a claim. He argues, he asserts, he emphasizes, he observes. So these are the really, it's important to make sure that the language that we're using effectively gets across the emotion that the author is conveying in his or her writing. Okay, so, and it's not always a good idea to use says. Okay, argues. Charles Murray argued that, so on and so forth. Okay, Murray insisted that instead of said. Okay, do you see that point? I think that's very important, and we're definitely going to be looking for this in your first writing assignment, use of these action verbs to introduce what others are saying. You can use this list. There are lists. If you Googled, action verbs for writing, there are tons of verbs out there, but this book presents a good number of them on pages 39 and 40, divided up into categories. So you could see on page 40 verbs for expressing agreement, so if you agree with what another is saying, verbs for questioning or disagreeing, and verbs for making recommendations, so like advocate, call for, demand, implore, plead. These are all verbs that I'll be asking you to use. So my suggestion, so you're not putting additional work on you for this first paper, is use some of these action verbs that are presented to us on pages 39 and 40 of the textbook. Okay. So we just went over this one here. Okay, so kind of in a review here quickly. Effectively summarizing is the best way to introduce what others are saying. Summarizing requires putting oneself into the author's shoes, and this is the Peter Elbow's believing game, and to capture the author's argument without applying his or her own biases. Okay, so then to summarize, writers must strike a balance between carefully summarizing the arguments of others and their own argument. So this is that looking outward and inward at the same time, keeping in mind what you're summarizing as it relates to your own argument. Okay, and then what we just covered is the use of signal verbs can help writers to enhance summaries and avoid list summaries, and really not mentioned here or written here, really portray the emotion, the level of action that the author is trying to convey in his or her writing. Okay, so the only other thing that I wanted to touch on here before class, I want you to think about this idea of introducing a quote, and this is what we're going to spend a lot of time on in class on Monday. So the authors introduced this idea of a quote sandwich. So the premise here is that a quote should not just be a standalone. So you shouldn't just have something, a statement that you make and then a quote. Instead, you introduce the quote, okay, and then you give the quote, and then you explain the quote afterwards. And this is what we're going to practice with in class on Monday. This is related to chapter 3, but I wanted to introduce you to this idea of the quote sandwich. So if you think, the sandwich here, the picture, the top piece of bread or bun is introducing the quote, and then the quote itself is everything in the sandwich itself, which is the majority and the important stuff of a sandwich. But without those introducing and explaining the quote, you don't have a sandwich. You just have what would be here. It looks like a salad. Okay, and then explanation of the quote would go lastly or on the bottom. Okay, that is it. Make sure you get the Blackboard discussion completed, and I will send out an announcement with the link to this video and um, the link to find the discussion. All right, thanks a lot. Have a good day.